As you've seen, we've got a tremendous resources, both wind and solar in the state, far more energy than we have, renewable energy than we have load. It's very difficult to export it because all the neighboring states have great wind resources also. And so we need to build the load in the state. And one way to build off-peak load, which is the best time for the utilities to get it, is with electric vehicles and using the smart chargers to be able to build that load at night. This slide is from EPRI, and the top bar is vehicles, both cars and small pickups, and the vast majority of that, 15 quads, is from petroleum. There's a little bit of ethanol, the little green on the top. If you look at all the blue bars totaled, that's the total electric energy consumed in all these sectors. So there's more energy being consumed by cars and small pickups, SUVs, than all the electricity in the whole US. So as you see, as we start taking on and getting a larger percentage of that electric vehicle load, how it can completely change our industry. And what are we doing as utilities in the state? Nebraska Power Association is made up of the 166 public power entities in the state. An EV task force was formed May 3rd of 2017, and representation from these utilities plus Southern, Fremont, NPPD Energy, and the Nebraska Energy Office, which Joe is representing here. So we've been looking what can the utilities do to form that.
Hi everybody, thanks for coming. It's so good to see so many familiar faces in the crowd and future friends. I'm Ann McCollister, Director of the Nebraska Community Energy Alliance. And I wanted to include, this is my favorite graphic, Mo will tell you. It's dated. Electrification Coalition published it in 2009 when it came into being. This is a national industry group. But Congressman Fortenberry talked about architecture changes. And what he's referring to, and I wish we had a similar graphic on the right from whence we pluck that little car where it's all kludged into the oil industry. Because then you can see the oil dependence was 93% in 2009, our dependency on oil for gasoline. But when you bring the electric vehicle over into the electrified side, you see the local diverse energy sources that will feed the electricity. You see the distribution system that we already own and have invested in Nebraska for years. You see transportation added to industrial, commercial, retail, and residential. But when I look at this, I think of the tiny town of Superior, Fremont, Gothenburg, Central City, the other communities, Kearney, who are building utility-scale solar on farms near their communities. Now that solar farm begins to provide really all the energy needs of that local community, and it keeps those dollars in Nebraska. I always use this quote now since it came out. Vehicles and the way they are used will change more in the next 2 decades than they have in the last 100 years. Nebraska Community Energy Alliance wants to be ready and will be ready. These are our members today. We started out with 9. This year, we approved an associate membership for non-governments, individuals, private organizations, or other governments who could join the Alliance at a low cost and participate in our grants where we're a primary grant sponsor. Associate members don't have voting rights, and their requests have to be approved by the board. This one is important. We define an advanced technology as one that reduces energy, lowers greenhouse gas emissions, and cuts costs. And we see utility-scale solar on the building side and electric vehicles on the transportation side as those two representing the biggest opportunities to save energy, reduce greenhouse gases, and to cut costs to communities. The way I message this in the public, though, is based on our data using today's dollars, today's energy rates, today's gas prices, is that I can drive 4 times as far in my electric vehicle as I can in my gas car and cut emissions in half for the same price. So far, we have participated in $8 million worth of projects in Nebraska with the help of the Nebraska Environmental Trust. I have just put in a 2019 funding request, but I'm looking for 2020 proposals. This is going to be a big year in 2020. We'll really be engaging in active development of Nebraska in a planned way rather than self-selected. So please think about joining, think about even just providing some input to me, give me your ideas for how best to plan Nebraska. Mo, I'm going to turn this over to you, and he'll give you our data.
Thanks, Ann. Yes, good afternoon. My name is Mo Alahmad, and I'm an associate professor at the Durham School of Architecture, Engineering, and Construction at UNL, and I'm working with the NCA to document the economic and environmental benefits for the projects that have taken place or undertaken by NCA with grant funding from the Nebraska Environmental Trust, NET. So I'm going to talk about the economic and environmental analysis, but I'm going to start for the case for infrastructure and its impact. By looking at two things. One is the electric vehicle adoption and then the supporting charging infrastructure. So looking at the number of electric plug-in and battery electric vehicle sales in the U.S. In 2015, they were 116,000. In 2018 through August, there are 220. So we see that the number of electric vehicles in our streets and highways is continue to increase. And as a result of that, we would need a charging infrastructure to support that. And so when we look at the charging infrastructure, there are 3 levels. The level 1, which is the residential 120 volt, that'll take 8 to 12 hours to charge a car. Level 2, which is the 240 volt, that can be installed both in the residential and in the commercial. And it takes 4 to 6 hours to charge, depending on the battery capacity of the electric car that you own. And then the fast DC charger, which takes about half an hour. And so looking at the numbers, and now I can't see with my glasses. I'm sorry. So looking at the numbers, there's in the U.S. as of September, there are 17,000 locations or charging station locations and approximately 43,000 plugs. Looking specifically into Nebraska, there is and again, I'm sorry, I can't see anymore. Oh, there's about 60 locations in Nebraska and about 118 level 2 charging stations, and then 6 DC, and then about 42 ports. I'm sorry, I don't have the computer in front of me, and I'm just sorry. Okay, so the case for the charging infrastructure is the fact that the National Renewable Energy Laboratory conducted a study and also a forecast for the charging infrastructure in the U.S. And so what they indicate is that the fact that having an adequate charging infrastructure will enable long distance travel, prevent range anxiety, and then promote the electric vehicle adoptions. As part of their analysis and their forecast, they determined that you will need a set number of charging stations that will ensure a nationwide charging opportunity. And then as the number of electric vehicles increases, then the demand for charging infrastructure will increase, and as a result, we're going to need more charging infrastructure to support that. So we see that, in this graph. This is where we are, where the charging infrastructure that we are installing right now is underutilized because we need those charging infrastructure to support the travel for the electric vehicle users. And then as the number of electric vehicle increases, then the demand for that will enable the installation of more charging infrastructure. So as part of the forecast that NREL did, is they found that by 2030, we will have 15 million cars in our streets and highways. And in order to support that, it will require to having 600,000 charging ports, that's a level 2 charging ports, and also 25,000 DC fast chargers. Then I looked into the state of Nebraska, and then I looked into two different parts. One to look in from the electricity perspective, and the second is to look from the number of charging infrastructure that's required. So looking into the electricity generation in Nebraska in 2016, we see that all the utility in Nebraska generate about 3,000 gigawatt hours. Now, in 2016, there were about 700,000 light-duty vehicles. If all of these light-duty vehicles were electric vehicles, then they will require 3,000 gigawatt hour of electricity. How much is that in comparison to our consumption in 2016? So if we look at our consumption in 2016, we see that the commercial sector account for 16%. And if we say, okay, those 700,000 cars that are all electric, they will account for 54% of that electricity. So you can see the impact of the electrified transportation on the utility in the future as the number of electric vehicles increases. The second part, and then in addition to that, we did a study to find out what is the impact if all these cars were electric. So we see that for every mile you drive, we would save about $63,000, and we would save 115 US tons. For every mile that you drive, this is how much reduction in CO2 as a result of having all these cars being electric. So that's the first part that we did. The second part that we did is we looked into the forecast, and we say, okay, by 2030, how many electric cars do we anticipate to have in Nebraska? And based on the analysis that was done by NREL, and then we modified that to fit the needs of Nebraska, we see that by 2030, we're going to have a total of 122,000 plug-in and full electric vehicles. So for those cars, how many charging stations do we need? So the study that we conducted determined that by 2030, we will need a total of 11,000 level 2 charging stations and 350 fast DC chargers. So this is the background for the need for the charging infrastructure and the case for electrified transportation. So now looking specifically into the benefits for the projects that has taken place as part of NCA and grant funding from NET, we needed to look into the economic and the environmental benefit. And in terms of the economic benefits, we looked into the different fuels, whether it's the conventional vehicle, the diesel vehicle, the compressed natural gas, and then the electric vehicle. And then we compared that with varying gas prices. And also by looking specifically, and this is what this means, specifically at the different communities who are participating in the projects. And so we see an average of $1,000 to $1,500 in saving for each utilization for an electric vehicle by a city manager or if a private citizen decide to purchase an electric car, this is how much the economic savings. With respect to the environmental saving, we needed we needed to compare the conventional vehicle, the diesel vehicle, the compressed natural gas vehicle with the electric vehicle. And so we know that the electric vehicle, when you're driving it, doesn't emit any greenhouse gas emissions, but the electricity that it uses emit, as part of the generation, emit the greenhouse gases. So in terms of the comparison, for every mile that you drive in a conventional vehicle, you emit 382 grams of CO2. When we compare that with the 2016 MPP generation mix, and making the calculation, we see that is reduced to 165 grams per mile you drive. So we see that, as Ann mentioned, you cut your CO2 by at least half, and in this case is more than half. The case where it becomes really interesting is the fact, and the reason why we are here, is the fact that the wind and solar generation, since they are renewable, as this percentage of renewable increases by the utilities in their electricity mix, we see that with a with the 75% renewable penetration in the electricity makeup, we see that we are reducing from 165 grams per mile to a 58. And then if the electricity makeup is 90% renewable, we see that reduction all the way down to 26 grams per mile driven. And so the specific data for the community that are participating in our project, there are 23 communities with a total of 32 electric vehicle, 9 compressed natural gas, and 95 charging port. We see that the benefits since the project started back in 2014, $40,000, and in terms of the CO2 emissions, 127 US tons. And this shows the data month over month. The other interesting part is actually with respect to the charging stations themselves, and are they being used? And so this data shows that back in 2013, in terms of the number of unique users. So this is for the whole 2013. If somebody goes and charge once, he's counted. If he goes to another charging station and uses that charging station, he's not counted twice. And as a result, in 2013, you see that we only have 19 unique users, and we had about 618 charging stations. These are the number of times somebody go to the charging station, plug their car, and so forth. Now, if we move forward and we look into 2018, so we see we already, through September, we're already passing all the number of the unique users there were in 2017. We are now at 541 unique users, and the number of sessions, 4,800. So we see that, you can see the graph. The graph tells the story in terms of, the utilization and usage of the electric vehicle. So we do have monthly reports that we generate that document all this data, and these reports are available at the website here, the www.ncacommunity.com. And that's my presentation. Next is Heather. Is it Joe or me?
Joe's up next.
Joe. Oh, okay. Thank you.
Well, this is going to be an adventure, I guess. The three things that I want to do today is first thank the Nebraska Power Association Electric Vehicle Charging Station Work Group that has allowed the Department of Environmental Quality to kind of join them as a result of the Volkswagen settlement, and we have a portion of funds in the Volkswagen settlement that are to be devoted to charging stations. Second thing, I'll just give a brief overview of how we're using the VW funds. And third, I'm going to ask you to fill out a survey that we've developed dealing with charging stations, have some key questions that we've asked. Those surveys are up in the Nebraska Energy Office booth, so I'd really encourage you and ask you to go up and take a look at those and fill that survey out. With regard to the first thing, the Nebraska Power Association, I feel a little bit like a wolf in sheep's clothing. As I said, the department came to the party a little late. It was after the work group had really got started, and we've joined them for the last few meetings, and with every meeting, we learn so much. And the problem with learning so much is that just generates a whole lot more questions that you have to have answered. We want to make the best use of the available funds when it comes to establishing charging stations. So again, I ask that you take a look at those surveys and complete those surveys. It will certainly help us. Additionally, if you have questions, or if you have thoughts with regard to what Nebraska can do to make the best available use of those funds, please contact us. It's important to stress that while we've had a lot of conversations with regard to the charging station funds and how to use them, we have not made any decisions. As I said, we're learning new things every day, asking new questions. And so before we make any final decisions, of course, we have much more to learn. So you may hear that DEQ has decided to do this or that with funds. That's simply not true at this point, or if it is, tell us so we know what it is that we're supposed to do. We haven't made decisions. We want to get all the information that we can. We want to hear from as many people as we can, and so don't hesitate to contact us. Take a quick look at what we have done with the Volkswagen funds. There's really 5 broad categories of, how many people know about the Volkswagen Environmental Mitigation Settlement? Okay. There's 5 broad categories where the money can be used. Those categories are transit buses. Omaha and Lincoln are the only eligible applicants for the transit bus category, and we've made a lot of progress with them. There's a existing diesel engine reduction act that existed before Volkswagen, and Volkswagen, the settlement allowed those funds to be merged, or not merged, but those funds can be used in concert with one another. There's a separate school bus categories. Again, we've made a lot of progress there and have actually submitted a request for funds on those. The charging station program, which is what we're talking about here today. And then there's an undefined category that's kind of a catch-all. Our strategy, and I want to first recognize Randy Smith with our department. Randy, do you want to wave? Randy's waving. Randy's the architect of the Volkswagen, our Volkswagen program. I'm really proud to say that Nebraska is among the leaders of the states in that we have our program on the books. It's been accepted. We've made 2 submittals for reimbursement for funds already. There's a number of states that don't even have their program finalized yet. We've got 10 years to spend the $12.5 million. We hope to spend that money in an expedited manner and hope to expend it in probably 5 years. The programs, the school bus replacement program, we're going to be dispersing that money in 2 rounds, and we've already notified the first round of successful applicants for that, and we'll be following that up next year. Those requests have been made, and we expect to receive funds for that in November. The transit bus replacements, as I said, we've submitted that request for funding, and the EV charging stations is what we're looking at. We're going to delay the charging station request for proposals, or however we decide to ask for proposals on that, probably until next year, later next year. Again, because we still have a lot to learn on that. We expect there'll be 2 disbursements of funds. We'll take a year off and see what else we learned from the first round. And the eligible actions based on demand is the kind of unknown category at this time. That can cover, it's kind of a catch-all category. Keep in mind that the Volkswagen settlement is intended to reduce diesel emissions, NOx in particular. So anything out there that is going to reduce NOx emissions may be an eligible category, whether that's replacing garbage trucks, replacing volunteer fire department diesel fire engines, those types of things. And the final category is the DERA category, which we have already received funds from that. And again, that was associated with school buses, garbage trucks, and irrigation engines. That's kind of it in a nutshell. Again, ask that you take a look at that survey and please respond, and please contact us if you have thoughts, whether that's charging stations or anything else having to do with the Volkswagen settlement. So, thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Scott Benson with Lincoln Electric System. Before I start, I want to thank my good friend Dave Rich here, because when Dave introduced me, he said I've been at LES for 17 years. Dave, I was a young man the last time I was at LES for 17 years, okay? So thank you very much for taking me back. So I'm going to go through the 3 primary things LES is doing to try to help prepare ourselves for a plug-in future. The first thing we said is, we've got to get a handle on what's the net benefit or net cost that the rest of our customers, those customer owners, are going to see anytime one electric vehicle gets added to our system. So we used a bunch of national averages. We leveraged a methodology that we used to evaluate our own energy efficiency or demand-side management programs. And what we came up with is it covers a pretty big range. And that can go from as much as a $300 loss to a $1,400 benefit. And that's all varying only one thing, and that's the time those people charge that vehicle. It's a big deal to us whether they're charging off-peak or on-peak. And when I say peak, everybody in the room probably understands that. That's that 1 hour of the year that we have to build the system for, even though we only use it once the entire year. So that's a pretty big swing. But when we got through that, we said, those are using national averages, but for the first time, we think we've got our finger on the pulse of what this really might mean to us economically. So the next thing we did is we said, okay, we're going to get in and work with the Electric Power Research Institute. They've got a handful of utilities that are working on a survey of customers. NPPD is also one of those participants. And it's really got 2 things it's trying to figure out. Number one, what's the primary barriers or drivers that are going to drive adoption where people go out there and get those more electric vehicles, bring those to our service territory. And then probably the part that we're even more excited about is they're going to turn this into a model specific to our service area for each of the participants, try to give you an idea of what that growth rate might look at. So you can start to see when might you feel those impacts, because we just went through that first slide. I told you it's a range of $300 to $1,400. That's 10 years brought back to today net present value. People see that and they go, that's not very much money, and it's not, but that was for one vehicle. What if a third of our customers drove one? What if we had 25 to 30,000, maybe even 40,000 people driving one of those vehicles? All of a sudden, those dollars start to add up. And so really the straw that stirs the drink, that's where we're at right now. That's our electric vehicle study. That's going to kick off here in November of 2018 and run until November of 2020. We've partnered with a company called Fleet Karma. They make this neat little device, if I get it out of my pocket. If you can see it in the back, it's a little plug-in thing. It goes into the onboard diagnostic port. Every vehicle since about the 90s has one. It's like having a meter on your car. Going to give us all kinds of information on the charging and where that vehicle goes, the trips it covers. So we work with Fleet Karma. We had a bunch of people sign up, and then we were going to work with them to go through and try to vet that out. And we were hoping that we could get 50 customers that would represent a pretty wide array of electric vehicles. Well, when I put this presentation together, we weren't at 50. Turns out we were about 90, and I think we're going to end up closer to 100. When you consider that, per our best guess, there's maybe 300 plug-in hybrids or electric vehicles in our service territory, to get 100 people to participate is pretty monumental. We're pretty happy with that response. So that brings us to where we're at right now. We're shipping these devices out, and they're all cellular enabled. So as soon as the customer plugs it in, it calls back home to Fleet Karma, lets them know it's plugged in and ready to go. And next month, we'll start collecting data. Now that data covers charging. So we're going to figure out when they charge, how long they charge, what kind of energy they consume when they charge. We're even going to figure out where they charge, because this little device is also GPS enabled. So we'll know, is it happening at home? Is it happening at a public station? Is it in the city of Lincoln? Is it even within the state of Nebraska? That's the kind of information we'll get. We're also going to get a lot of trip data. We'll know every time they drive that vehicle, how far they went, how much energy they consumed, what the state of charge of the battery was before and after, even the auxiliary load. So we'll know how much energy is going into the air conditioning or the heating, the radio. A lot of data. There's data out there like this that covers that breadth, but most of it's on the coast. You don't see a lot of it for this part of the country with these weather patterns. We're pretty excited about that. So what's the customer get out of this? Well, they get $25 when we first start collecting data, so in about a month. They're going to get another $25 at the end of the 2-year period when they return our little hardware dongle here. And they're also going to get access to an online web portal so they can see all the same data that we do, but just for their vehicle. Now, I should point out a couple of things. All the data is anonymized. So LES will know the 100 people that are in the survey, but we can't put a person with the vehicle. We don't care about that. We're just looking for vehicle data. So that's an important thing. The other thing is the GPS data, that is restricted only to charging. We don't know where they're driving. We don't care where they're driving, but we do know where they plug that vehicle in. So if you look at how's all this work together, well, we kind of view it as a puzzle. You got to kind of work from the ground up. So we had that net benefit study. That's going to help us identify how a single vehicle might economically impact LES and the rest of our customers. And then you couple that with that EPRI study, and there we're going to figure out why are customers going to adopt these vehicles, and because of that model, when might we start to feel those impacts in more mass? And then you put the bow on top of it with that electric vehicle study that's just kicking off, because that's going to give us quality data for this part of the country. Lets us go back and further refine how those vehicles impact us, and when coupled with that EPRI model, when we really might start to see these impacts that we have to be aware of. And all that really goes together to just help us answer the one question that kind of is king of all of them. What should LES be doing to prepare for a plug-in future? Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. I'm Heather Siebken. I'm here representing Omaha Public Power District. I was asked to come and give a little update regarding our pilot program that we kicked off over the summer, kind of what led us up to it, how's it going, and what does it entail. So to start my story off, I'm going to begin with a poll for the crowd. How many of you are driving an all-electric vehicle? How many of you are driving a hybrid? And how many of you are in a gas-powered vehicle? How many of you came here today in horse and buggy? I'm guessing none, so we have something in common. As a crowd here today, we 100% represent a consumer who has bitten the bug, I guess you can say. We've all come and embraced a new technology of our time, and we are no longer using old technology of the horse and buggy. The gas-powered vehicle at one point in time was considered a disruptor. And you had the naysayers, it won't happen, right? It won't happen because there's not enough gas stations. It won't happen because there's not enough paved roads. But what came first? The gas-powered vehicle or the gas stations on every corner? And when you start thinking about that, and that's exactly kind of what OPPD did, is they recognized that electric vehicles were a disruptor of our generation today. And you look 20 years, 30 years, who knows how many years into the future, and we're all going to look back and we're all probably going to be driving our electric vehicles thinking, I never thought I would buy one of these, but here I am today. So we set together a team, a strategic initiative team, the Integrated Energy Marketplace Strategic Initiative team, to do just that. We needed to look at emerging technologies. We needed to look at different ways to engage with our customer for what the future was bringing to us, and we needed to figure out how to overcome this disruptor. We needed to answer, how do we create a strategy for electric vehicles that promotes load growth? It supports our customers' needs and preferences. It accelerates adoption, but most importantly, as you heard from Tim Burke today, it supports our mission of always providing a commitment to reliability. So we started out with a little benchmarking, as most companies would, and we conducted some market research only to see what we were anticipating. In our territory, there was really little adoption of electric vehicles right now. It is that new of a technology. It wasn't necessarily surprising, but like I said, it gave us our baseline so we can see where we need to grow from. There was limited public charging stations, but one thing was impressive. There was a standard set of growth year over year. We saw that it was coming our direction because it wasn't, even though it's small in comparison to the gas-powered vehicles and everybody who raised their hands today, it was growing. So to continue on with that research, we're able to kind of memorialize what we saw in some national research. Customer interest and knowledge, charging access, upfront, as well as operating costs, and vehicle performance and availability were really all standing in the way. What was causing this to have growth, but not an accelerated amount of growth? And again, I go back to the horse and buggy. There were things that were stopping the growth at first there as well, but eventually, again, as a consumer base, we made it through that. Businesses adapted, new businesses developed. And so we kind of looked at, well, how can OPPD impact some of these barriers to entry? And that's what you see highlighted there in the orange font there. And we figured, we can help educate the customer base. We can help bring, some interest to these vehicles and making sure that we're pointing them to the right direction to learn more. We can help with, creating more charging station access. We've got good relationships in this industry. We know who to partner with to help bring those forward to us. We can help with some of the costs. We've got partners again and relationships that can help bring some discounts to our consumers. Can't really help too much with the vehicle performance and availability right now, but certainly we're going to try to find a way on that as well and at least influence that industry. And then I had a team of internal analysts and engineers, something that I don't represent, quite honestly, who kind of said, all right, let's take this slow, let's walk before we run, let's take ourselves and put ourselves as a passenger in that buggy versus just racing out of here in an electric vehicle, and make sure that we can, again, maintain that reliability. And really the research and analysis shows that, there's minor impact on an overall, but there is a potential for localized stress in high adoption neighborhoods, and we have to be concerned with that. So before we just go out there and start plugging down, charging stations and doing the full-fledged, like I said, just pedal to the ground moving forward, we needed to create something that gave us data so that we could truly analyze the impact in our own territory based on our own infrastructure and systems. So in June of this year, we released the OPPD EV pilot, and this is focused on a home charging residential right now. This is the first pilot. I would say it's the first project of many projects to come around electric vehicles to help us decide how OPPD is going to play a part in this disruption to our industry. The pilot really focuses around collecting research. It's a way for us to see who's charging, when they're charging, how long they're charging, how much they're using. If we're able to extrapolate that data based on where the location of these cars are, we can kind of tell how it's going to have impact, again, on those secondary circuits. Again, education is a big part of it. So with any of our initiatives we move forward, whether being residential, commercial, or otherwise, it's a means of being able to go out there and educate and promote the benefits and value of electric vehicles. Our pilot was put together with 4 different components. So the first one we had through a wonderful relationship with NCEA was the ability to administer a grant that they had received from NET. And we were able to offer a $4,500 rebate for our customers who are purchasing a new electric vehicle, as well as a ChargePoint home charging station, which allowed us to have access to their charging data. The great story here is that it took us less than 4 months to completely sell out of those rebates. So by putting some education out there, by helping them understand the value, by helping with one of those other barriers, cost, it brought them kind of, out and into the lots of car dealerships to make purchases that maybe they were questioning or a little bit more hesitant about until there was some incentive. We also have just a $500 rebate, again, through the same grant and relationship for residential charging stations. So for somebody who's purchasing one of the ChargePoint home charging stations, shares their data with us for a minimum of 3 years, there's a $500 rebate. We still have a couple hundred of those to go. So if there's anybody in here that's interested, please take advantage of that. The third component we were able to bring to our customers were dealership discounts. So again, we kind of had some partnerships and relationships that we were able to take advantage of. So we were able to partner with both Nissan and Audi to bring a discount for showing up at their dealership, purchasing a new electric vehicle, showing your proof of OPPD customer by giving them one of our bills. and they were able to get a on-site discount of $3,000 off a new Nissan Leaf, $1,000 off of the upcoming Audi e-tron with Audi. We're looking to expand these kind of relationships and bring increasing value to our customers. And then the last component of our rebate pilot, electric vehicle pilot, was, again, just part of that education is making sure that everyone was aware, all of our customers were aware, that there were federal tax incentives that they could take advantage of. Through survey and market research, we did note that a lot of people did not know that those existed. While there's certainly plenty of people who do, the majority showed that they weren't necessarily aware of that. So the great thing about this as just a consumer, standing up here myself, is that I can bundle some of these things together. I can go to Nissan and purchase a new Nissan Leaf. I can apply for the $4,500 rebate. I can apply for the tax credit. I can have a half-off vehicle, half off. It's average 30,000 vehicle, and there's about 15,000 sitting there for you. So that was a really, really good carrot to dangle to get the attention of our customers and make sure that they, again, they're paying attention, they understand, and we're bringing them to the forefront of the disruptor. We've had great success. Like I said, the rebate sold out. The one rebate sold out in less than 4 months. Nissan has been able to share with us the 90 days preceding the launch of our pilot, they had only sold one Nissan Leaf in our 13-county territory. In the 90 days following the launch of our pilot, they had moved that past 15 cars sold in our territory. They were additionally able to tell us that they knew of vehicles that were purchased outside of our territory, although being driven within our territory, but we didn't exactly have a way to get good metric data on that. So 15 plus vehicles in 90 days versus one the 90 days immediately prior. So there's good, again, consumer value here for them as the driver. There's value for the local companies, and we hope to bring partnerships to the forefront in the future as well. So that is our pilot in a nutshell, and we'll be taking some questions later, I believe.
Thank you. I have a few slides to wrap up, and then we'll be taking questions. So what has NPPD been working on? And as Heather mentioned, customer knowledge, that is a big, big issue. And so we worked with our wholesale customers. We picked the Bolt because of the Chevy dealerships across our service territory. And this is the Bolt that we had wrapped, publicpower.com. It was out at the State Fair, if you saw the booth there, also at Husker Harvest Days. And that's the basics, 150 kW motor, 200 horsepower motor. We installed a public/workplace charger at the NPPD office. And we're planning for potential DC fast charger there, 7.2 kW each port. And then we have a grant request in with NCEA. We're going to be bumping our $200 rebate for home chargers to $500, assuming we get that, so we can keep up with OPPD. We'll have a $4,000 incentive for 15 battery-powered electric vehicles. We're looking at some more workplace chargers at 3 of our offices. And we're also encouraging, and I would encourage all of you to think about this. If you know anyone building a new home or a new business, to think about pre-wiring for electric vehicles. That new home is going to be there 50, 60 years plus. What's the probability that at some point there's going to be an electric vehicle plugged in? So we're trying to encourage that now. At some point it's most likely to be a code requirement, but we want to encourage electric vehicles. With that, let's start taking some questions. There's a mic there. Step up there, ask a question, state who you are, who you're with. If you don't jump up, here we go. Thank you. Is it on? Yes.
Hello.
Hello, it's working.
Okay, I'm Pam Smith, husband Tim Smith. We're from Hastings, and we are with Pam and Tim Smith, residential owners of solar panels, thermal panels, earth tubes, and an electric car hybrid plug-in. We have noticed in our travels across the United States that there are lots of different companies that have these charging stations, and you have to have their specific card to pay for each one, and there's an upfront cost to that. That's one issue. Another one is there's this minimum amount you have to pay, whether you only need this much fuel, you have to pay for this much fuel. Any ideas how that's going to be resolved?
So I think you're referring to Tesla right now. They have 4 DC fast chargers across Nebraska on I-80, and as I understand, they only charge Tesla cars right now.
I'm not referring to Tesla. I'm talking about across the country, all the different companies that own the charging stations, not just Tesla.
Okay. I'm only familiar with what's in Nebraska. I know Electrify America is putting in some charging stations. The first one I think was announced here at a Casey's in Lincoln, and I think it's going to have multiple plug-ins. I did see how Electrify America was charging at one of their first installations in Chicopee, Maryland, and it was $1 to connect, to plug in. It was 30 cents a minute. Okay, for as long as you were plugged in. They would send you a text message when your vehicle was charged. Then you had 10 minutes to move your car, and if you did not move your car from that parking space, then they would start charging you 40 cents a minute for taking that space. And so each entity and how they charge, that's a whole big business, you know, for them to figure out, and it's a challenge. In Nebraska, only electric utilities can sell energy by the kilowatt hour. So you'll see these charging stations either sell by the time or the session or something. And because if they're selling by the session, depending how they define that, you may have a charge for a half an hour and you may only want 10 minutes or something
Yeah,
like
Hastings is $6 minimum, and we only need like 50 cents worth of electricity on our little.
that. Any other
EMAX,
responses?
CMAX.
I'll let the panel.
Mrs. Smith?
Yes.
Did most of the stations have an 800 number that you could call?
I don't know. I was researching it online before we got there.
So how did you charge?
We didn't.
Oh, okay,
We were investigating this before we got our car.
gotcha.
And then so we just know about local like Hastings area now from
go to
personal
mine.
experience.
Go to the mic. Mark's got an answer. He's going to take the mic here, so.
I'm only going to speculate what that structure is trying to do, and it's a disservice, I think, the industry does sometimes to the folks who don't think about what it takes to provide that service at that point, and that's an enormous amount of infrastructure, transformers, and the ability to serve a very, could be significant load. It may not even be your vehicle, but the utility has to recover the cost to put in that service. And so I'm only speculating that some of those fixed costs are designed to recover those fixed costs that they have to pay for that service. And until there is a critical number of vehicles, that is a stout component of the rate. And I'm only speculating that that might be what they're trying to recover there.
We
And-
had.
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. No, we had a similar situation at Ashland at the DC fast charger because people were commuting from Lincoln to Omaha using it, but soon the small, like the Nissan Leafs or a Volt, not a Volt, but something, a car that had less of a charge and was able, they were getting charged the same amount that a Tesla was. And he said, I don't need that much. So we just changed the price. We just responded to market response to it.
All the different companies, that's, you have a list of things that are in the way of this
Right.
being universally accepted. That's one of them.
Yeah.
The fact that there's so many different companies, you have to get each one's special credit card, charge card.
I don't know about every company, but the ones that we use, they offer a charge pass card, but there's also an 800 number. You just call it up, you give them your credit card, they go fine. So, yeah.
Another question, please?
Yes, I'm Gabriel Steinmeier, excuse me, economic developer with the city of Neely in northeast Nebraska. I guess the question I have is what can we as rural communities do to help kind of push this electric vehicle infrastructure forward? I know in our county, in Antelope County, I know of one person who has a Tesla. However, we have developers who come from out of state, and we have guests and friends that are trying to come from out of state with their electric vehicles. I mean, we paid a couple $100s to just re-outfit the dryer appliance outlet in our office so that we could hook up a client's Tesla so that he could charge, because it was, I mean, and it was a 7-hour charge for him. Lucky he stayed overnight. But, I mean, we don't have an infrastructure for that in rural Nebraska. Do you have any suggestions on what we can do? I mean, what we're doing right now is just pushing for smart homes, and we have a plan for, over the next 2 years, 8 homes that are going to be smart homes with electric vehicle charging stations in the home, and we're including the service of a vehicle that's going to be an electric vehicle in the cost of purchasing the home, so that we can actually amortize those electric vehicles over the cost of the home and include that. So that's something we're doing in Neely. But I don't know, do you have other suggestions of what we can do to help push this along? Because we definitely see this as something that we need in rural communities and we see needing in the future.
So Joe and Ann, this is your opportunity. Ann, you can go first, and we'll pass the mic down to Joe.
Well, I think you should join the Alliance and be part of some planning. One of the things that I'm thinking as you're talking is this could be replicated and be so exciting for so many communities. Yeah. And so if you know, and then we'll write a grant. We'll get you some funding requests.
That would be great.
Yes.
That's the biggest problem in rural communities is our small towns, 1,500, 1,600 people. That's a lot of funding to try to have that community put up.
I'm telling you, if Greater Nebraska wants something, they get it done. You know, Lincoln and Omaha are big engines of growth, but rural Nebraska is extremely effective.
Yeah.
My answer is going to be kind of similar. You know, I would suggest that you talk to others that already have charging stations. You know, the challenge that you have is, from our standpoint, we want to put the chargers where they're going to be used, where they make the most sense. That's not the sole criteria that we use. You know, we want to strategically place them where it will advance the technology. But, you know, City of Lexington, you know, give the city administrator a call. He's very proud of their charging stations. The thing is, you got to have them, you got to have use. So you may want to step out and purchase vehicles yourself or talk to the city. You know, municipal vehicles are ideal for electric because they're all short trips, and you know they can charge them overnight. So, but talk to others. You know, as Ann says, network.
Perfect. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Also, a plug to fill out the survey at the Nebraska Energy Office about where you think chargers should be located and that type of thing. Other questions?
HB Singh with Evolution Advisory. My question sort of goes along the lines of the level 3 stations that, you know, right now Electrify America is covering the I-80 corridor. So I think at this point, when it comes to the level 3 stations, they're probably going to be looking at places that are not along I-80 and kind of tying in some of those rural communities that people had talked about. The question I have is that for Evolution Advisory's sort of fleet management model, one of the things that we look to do is to have that level 3 station serve as a dual purpose. So not only for people traveling across the state, but also recharging fleet vehicles, you know, 100 to 200 miles before noon, come back for lunch break, rapid recharge, back on the road, again, afternoon. So I guess my question would be directed more towards the utilities, but I wanted to find out if it is possible, and kind of along the lines of what Heather had talked about with the 50 kilowatt threshold, is it possible to avoid demand charges by using stationary storage or solar when we go above 50 kilowatts, go to 150, 200, 250? Is it allowable to avoid the demand charges by using battery or solar when those stations are used for fleets? Rapid recharge.
I'll let Lincoln and OPPD respond to that first. You know, pass the mic down, Ann.
Sure.
Thank you. Can you avoid the demand charges by either using solar or battery storage along with electric vehicle charging that may have a 100 kW load, for example?
Okay, Heather gave me the mic, so I'm up. Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, storage is going to be something that's directly applicable, because if you have storage there and you're able to keep that demand down, that's going to be helpful. Solar is another one that, depending on the utility you're working with and how much they're going to let you hook up, that'd be something you could also do there. Most of the state, everybody in the state actually has net metering up to 25 kW with solar. I think HP, you're talking about numbers that are maybe a little bit higher than that. For our understanding of state statute, you can have as much solar as you want, as long as you keep it behind your meter so it's being offset by your load. The problem there is going to be how intermittent your charging load is, right? If you put in 200 kW of solar and you very rarely have 200 kW of charging, most of the time you're going to be exporting to the grid, so you have to manage that, and that's where the storage could come in. So practically speaking, no problem. You could definitely do that. Economically, that might be tough to justify, but if you could come with the dollars, I think that would work perfectly fine.
Do you have anything you want to add, Heather? No. Okay. I will add that one challenge with solar, if over that noon hour you got a cloudy day, the utility's still going to get you. So that's the challenge there. So, okay, well, we've run out of time. Let's give the panel a round of applause. For you that are looking for PHE credits, there's a sign-up sheet out there, and the next session I think is going to be starting in a few minutes. So thank you for your participation.